Not only is the title not clickbait, it's actually a bit of an under-exaggeration, as the real number is closer to $2.135 trillion in assets that have been lost by the U.S. government. So welcome back, and I hope you are having an outstanding day, or at least a better day than the Department of Defense is having. After 1,600 auditors combed through the Department of Defense's $3.5 trillion in assets and $3.7 trillion in liabilities, officials found that the department couldn't account for about 61% of its assets, Pentagon Comptroller Mike McCord told reporters on Tuesday. That is absolutely insane. 61% of its $3.5 trillion in assets is $2.135 trillion in assets that's just gone. They not only do they not know what happened to it, they don't even know where it went. They don't even know where to start looking for it to figure out what happened to it. If you look here, despite having trillions of dollars in assets and receiving hundreds of billion dollars in federal grants, the department has never detailed its assets and liabilities in a given year. For the past 3 fiscal years, the department audit has resulted in a disclaimer of opinion, meaning the auditor didn't get enough accounting records to form an assessment. Not only is that money disappearing, but it's not even being accounted for in any capacity, so we can't even hope to begin to figure out where it's gone. If you ran a private company and lost 61% of your assets, say your internal accounting department came to you, your department head, and said, hey, we're doing an internal audit to make sure everything is accounted for. You only have 39% of the stuff you said you had. Where has it gone? And if you couldn't account for that because you didn't keep any kind of records, then you would be A, fired, and B, probably sued or arrested for embezzlement from your company. 61% of the assets you are responsible for don't just disappear. They go somewhere. If you were a public company and it turns out you had lost 61% of your assets or couldn't account for 61% of your assets, you would get an SEC investigation and possibly thrown into jail for investor fraud. If you had a company worth $100 billion and you said, oh, actually, I only know where 39 billion of that is and the other 61 billion doesn't exist or wasn't accounted for, that's illegal. That's fraud. That's an SEC investigation and possibly an IRS investigation as well, as they look into where all of that money went. And what makes me even more upset about this is that this is taxpayers' money. We gave the money to the government with the understanding that it would be used for issues of national concern. Now, there is some debate to be had about what the most important issues of national concern are, whether that be free education or better healthcare systems or fixing Social Security or government-sponsored like utilities and services like firefighters and policemen and so on. But we can all agree that we gave that money to the government with the understanding it would be spent on things that are important to us and that would help Americans in some way or some capacity, if not now, then at some point in the future. But if the money is just gone and we don't know where it's gone, then probably it's not being used to help anybody, not now and definitely not in the future. And what makes the situation even more insane is the things we could do or accomplish or the stuff we could afford if we had that money. Looking over here, how much would free education cost? For first dollar tuition-free program, the cost would be about $58 billion a year if that was implemented. If we had $2.1 trillion in spending, we could have this first dollar program implemented at every college in America for about $58 billion, roughly. This is an estimate, of course. And that's decades of college free education paid for. Think of the boost to the economy if essentially anybody who wanted an education was just able to get an education, and the efficiency that would come with that, and the personal increases in wealth that would come with that, and the ability to invest and save for the future. There's just so much good that money could have done that we're just simply unable to do. Now, first dollar versus last dollar is not that important to know. First dollar is money that's given to you before any other public funding or federal grants that you might get, and last dollar is given to you after federal funding and grants. So last dollar does tend to be a little bit cheaper because it waits and sees what's already been given to you and then gives you kind of the remainder of what you need. First dollar is a little more expensive because it just gives it to you up front, and then whatever else you can earn on top of that, it's fine. It's yours to keep. But it gets even more ludicrous than that. Look at this. Credit card debt in America, $925 billion. With the amount of money that's lost, we could have wiped that out 2.5 times over. And even more interestingly than that, with $1.75 trillion in total student loans, including federal and private loans, we we could have wiped all that out as well. The insane boosts to the economy we could have given through relief or support or funding for other projects with the amount of money that just conveniently disappeared is absolutely mind-boggling. Now, there are some people that are saying we could have afforded Medicare for all for that. Most of these people are on Reddit, so, take that with a grain of salt. However, that's estimated to be about $25 trillion through 2026, and Bernie Sanders even talked about how much it would cost. Sanders says that the economists estimate Medicare for all would cost between $30 and $40 trillion over the next 10 years, so that's not exactly a realistic number, but also that is basically the only thing we couldn't have afforded with the amount of money that we're missing. I mean, look at this. We could literally end world hunger with that amount of money. Back in July of 2021, United Nations World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley told us it would cost an estimated $40 billion each year to end world hunger by 2030. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the $2.1 trillion that we just happen to not know where it is. We could have literally cured world hunger by 2030 with this money. But maybe we're not interested in going international with it when we want to keep the $2.1 trillion local. That's perfectly reasonable. Currently in the United States, as of 2020, there are about 42.31 million people who are living in poverty. Now, we could give each one of those people $50,000 to help bring them out of poverty. That's a life-changing amount of money. Think of the good they could do with that. They could purchase food and services and the boost of the economy that would provide. They could buy houses. They could invest and build wealth for future generations. The main point of this video is that it's just absolutely absurd. One, that it happened. Two, that we're just not talking about it. This should boil your blood on both ends of the aisle. It does not matter which side you are on. The fact that $2.1 trillion in taxpayer money that we gave to the government with the understanding that it would do good either here or overseas is just gone. Now, with this, there are a lot of conspiracy theories jumping around. A lot of people are saying it's to fund black ops operations. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, we're, overseas governments and finagling with terrorists and OPEC and oil and yada yada. There are also people saying that probably it's just contractors overcharging for things that they're not actually delivering, and the U.S. not really caring about that. I don't know how much stake I put on any of those, except probably the contractor one. I can definitely see that happening. But the big thing I want to talk about is that where it went, we're probably not ever going to find that out. But what we can do for the future is stop it from happening again. If you look at this, the audit cost about $203 million in fees, with about $1 billion in reclamation costs to fix the identified problems. $203 million in fees is essentially nothing when it comes to the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Department of Defense is given every year and the trillions of dollars it currently has. So my suggestion would be just set up a private accounting firm whose entire job it is to audit the Department of Defense just on a rolling basis. And every year they put out a big report about how it's doing, because then we could either find the money and use it for its original intended purposes, or we could figure out that we don't need that much money and assets in the Department of Defense, in which case it would cost about $200 million in order to reallocate hundreds of billions of dollars to other organizations or other sectors of government or private entities that could use that money. It's the tiniest investment of having an accounting firm costing $100 or $200 million for the purpose of realizing where the money is going and if we actually need it to be going there in the first place. So that's my tiny thought. Obviously, it's not going to change anything. Essentially, nobody even noticed that this had happened. I texted my dad about it, who works in the government, and he didn't even realize that it happened. This is just insane. Everyone should be outraged at the fact that $2.1 trillion, literally economy-changing amounts of money, are just being casually lost, and nobody knows where it's going. So write your senators respectfully, of course, and see if they can figure out what's going on. Everybody have a nice day.